The Holy Gospel according to John. Glory to you, O Lord. The Passover of the Judeans was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Judeans then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Judeans then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. She wasn't sure what exactly she expected to happen, but it wasn't this. She could never have imagined what was happening right in front of her. You might even say that it was unprecedented. That seems to be the word of the last year, doesn't it? We're living through unprecedented times, an unprecedented election, an unprecedented pandemic. And to be perfectly honest, I'm getting a little tired of the word unprecedented. But before we retire that word, I can't help but think that maybe that's exactly the kind of thing that God is up to. Always working in unprecedented ways, through unexpected and surprising people and places. She wasn't sure what she expected to happen. But when she saw Pharaoh's daughter and her attendants coming down to bathe in the river just as the basket was floating by, she held her breath expectantly, fearfully. After all, this was the daughter of the man who had ordered all of those horrifying deaths. And she couldn't help but wonder if he'd be the next victim. Had her and her mother's covert act of brave defiance been for nothing, only protracting the inevitable? It's easy to overlook the beginning of the 10 Commandments, to hear this new set of instructions as an isolated passage, and to forget the context that has brought the newly freed Hebrews to this point. Because, of course, that part doesn't make it into the catechism. But it's right there. God spoke all these words. "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." These 10 commandments, this new way of life that God is offering to the people, is embedded in the story that came before it, rooted in an unfolding story of deliverance and liberation, a reminder of God's mighty power to save. a reminder of God's power to save in unexpected people and unprecedented circumstances. It's easy to overlook the beginning of this story, the very beginning, before the Red Sea, before the plagues, before let my people go, before the burning bush. Before all of that were three brave, defiant women. Moses' mother and sister who risked everything to hide their son and their brother for 3 months, and who reluctantly and tearfully let go of the basket, watching it drift further and further down the river and out of sight. If Pharaoh's officials didn't kill him, surely the perils of the Egyptian wilderness would. They could hardly have expected the unexpected. When Pharaoh's daughter opened the baskets, took pity on the crying boy, and without missing a beat, accepted the invitation of the girl who came seemingly out of nowhere with the offer to go get a Hebrew woman to nurse him. Of course, little did she know that Hebrew nurse and this mystery girl were actually the boy's mother and sister. And did she herself ever think about the inherent risk for herself of harboring a foreigner in Pharaoh's courts and raising him as a part of her family? It's the deliverance story before the deliverance story. God moving and working through unexpected people and in unexpected places. 3 unnamed women, without whom none of the story to follow would have ever happened. Pharaoh's daughter, who heard the cry of the infant Moses, is like the God who hears the groaning of the enslaved Israelites, who remembers the covenant, who notices God's people and their suffering, who is already hard at work to intervene, indeed, who has never stopped intervening and working for the liberation and salvation of all God's people. It's an unprecedented story of liberation, a charter narrative that would begin to define the Hebrew people, the Israelite nation, the people of God, the people from which Jesus, the embodied Word, would later emerge. Flipping tables and cracking whips and driving out the money changers from his father's house. It's not that the temple and its rituals were somehow becoming unimportant or obsolete, but it's that those things had so consumed the conscience of the faithful and had become so corrupted that those things became like God, and that God's people had lost sight of the presence of God in all places, in unexpected places, not confined to any one temple, but on the loose, without barrier or obstruction, pervading every corner of creation, embodied in the person of Jesus, the Word made flesh. Christ crucified. Foolishness? A stumbling block? Or a bold declaration that God chooses to make God's home among the foolish and despised and rejected people of the world. A reminder of the foolish and liberating bravery of the Exodus women. a reminder that God is with us in our suffering, in our grief, and in our isolation, even in unprecedented times. A reminder of God's unprecedented covenant promise. Expect the unexpected.